This podcast is brought to you by Progressive. Are you driving your car or doing laundry right now? Podcasts go best when they're bundled with another activity, just like Progressive's home and auto policies. They're best when bundled too. Having these two policies together makes insurance easier and could help you save. Customers who save by switching their home and car insurance to Progressive save nearly $800 on average. Quote a home and car bundle today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $793 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary.
This episode is brought to you by Choiceology, an original podcast from Charles Schwab. Choiceology is a show about the psychology and economics behind the decisions we make every day and how to make better ones. I'm Dr. Katie Milkman. Join me as I share true stories from Nobel laureates, athletes, authors, and everyday people faced with monumental decisions. We'll share useful tools and strategies to help you make better decisions in your own life. You can find Choiceology at schwab.com/podcast or wherever you listen.
When we want to make connections, when we want to make friends, we sometimes can feel like, well, I should take this person on as a friend because this is the only person that's available to me. Or we might stay in a relationship with a friend because there isn't anyone else. But the truth is that there are people who are good matches for us, and there are people that just might not be a good match, right?
Welcome to How To. I'm Carvell Wallace. You might remember that earlier this year, we did a series of episodes about friendship. It was all about listeners talking about the twists and turns they've encountered on their friendship journeys. Well, this week, we have another listener in search of the perfect friendship, but as you'll hear, she has a very specific problem, a mental health diagnosis that means making new connections can be especially challenging.
My name is Leah. I'm just really struggling with friendships and dealing with the mental health diagnosis on the side of that. I have schizophrenia, and basically I've just struggled with getting to know people and trying to manage all that alongside my mental health diagnosis.
So I know that there are a lot of misconceptions in the media and in movies and TV and whatever about schizophrenia. Can you tell us a little bit about what your experience is with it, and maybe what it is that people frequently misunderstand about it?
Well, I think that people frequently misunderstand that, like, we're, quote, violent people, but, I wouldn't say we are at all. We're not violent. I mean, we're just, people with I would say extraordinary experiences, and my experiences have been mainly with like hallucinations and delusions and difficulty thinking, like disorganized thoughts, not having a lot of motivation, just feeling really disorganized, is what I would call it.
And how old were you when you got this diagnosis?
I was 20.
And how did that diagnosis change your life?
Oh my gosh, it really changed my life. I mean, it was like one of those things that I had a psychotic episode when I was 20, and basically, it shook my world up. You question your reality after that, for sure. You're kind of like, is what I see and believe in really true? And is it, not? I mean, it's like, I ask myself that every day, throughout everything I do, just because it's so confusing to have this kind of disorder,
And then this diagnosis seems to have made it difficult for you to like either build community or maintain friendships. Can you talk a little bit about what your experience with that is?
Yeah, so like I'm disabled, I stay at home, but basically like I had a neighbor that was my friend, and she just ended up thinking that I was too emotional and just thinking that like I was too needy. That's been the general kind of viewpoint, I guess, of me, is that I'm just somebody who, but due to the mental, and I think it's due to the mental illness, because like I reach out for these supports, and maybe it's like I'm overdoing it kind of like like they want to be friends, but then I'm like leaning on them like they're like a therapist almost, and I don't mean to do that. I just think that maybe that would like help us bond.
Leah does see a therapist, but like so many people who do, there are things that she prefers to talk about with her therapist and things she'd rather talk about with friends, which is why she'd like a friend that she can have a deeper connection with.
People who want to just have that bond, and have those deep conversations and and have those things that just strengthen a relationship, you know, because I feel like a lot of times people, they don't want to get into those kind of conversations, you know, they don't want to really dig deep.
That's where our expert for this week comes in, Dr. Aleksandra Rayska.
I am a clinical psychologist working in a group practice in Manhattan. I've been a psychotherapist probably for over 15 years now.
So I guess, hearing this so far, what are some of your first thoughts?
I was thinking about this idea that people who have mental illness, but specifically people who might have schizophrenia, are considered to be violent people, right? Like the jokers, the flying over cuckoo's nest, right? Like all those images that can be very scary. And I think that in some ways you're really working uphills. I think there is much more openness at this point for people to talk about their anxiety, their depression, different mental health struggles. But I think that schizophrenia really suffers from a lot of stigma still.
We're going to talk about that stigma with both of our guests and about the pressure we put on ourselves to be someone that other people want to spend time with friendship, with mental health, or with just being a social person. There's something in this conversation for you. Stick around.
This episode is brought to you by Choiceology, an original podcast from Charles Schwab. I'm Dr. Katie Milkman, a behavioral scientist and professor at the Wharton School, and the author of the best-selling book, How to Change. You may have heard expressions like, time to get up and going, today's bad decisions aren't going to make themselves, or bad decisions make good stories. But really, no one wants to suffer the consequences of making a bad choice. Join me as I share true stories from sports heroes, Nobel laureates, and everyday people faced with monumental decisions. We'll discuss the latest research in behavioral science and dive into themes like whether we can learn to make smarter decisions and how powerful it can be to get a do-over. And we'll share useful tools and strategies to help you make better choices in your own life. You can find Choiceology at schwab.com/podcast or wherever you listen.
Apple Card is the perfect cashback rewards credit card. You earn up to 3% daily cash on every purchase every day. That's 3% on your favorite products at Apple, 2% on all other Apple Card with Apple Pay purchases, and 1% on anything you buy with your titanium Apple Card or virtual card number. Visit apple.co/card calculator to see how much you can earn. Apple Card issued by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch. Subject to credit approval. Terms apply.
We're back with Dr. Aleksandra Rayska and our listener, Leah, who is looking to grow her group of friends while also navigating a mental health condition, schizophrenia.
One thing that I think is also important to remember about mental illness and schizophrenia is that it's a spectrum of experiences. I think that many people, when they hear the diagnosis, they often imagine, oh, that means that I will never be able to work. That means that I will have to be hospitalized periodically for extended periods of time, that my ability to function in society will be severely curtailed. That is true for some people. There's plenty of people who live with schizophrenia just amongst us in our communities. So maybe someone is hearing voices, maybe someone is having perceptions or seeing things that are not there, or feeling things in their body that are not there. So kind of like positive symptoms are like additions to, enhancements to reality. And negative symptoms are things that are kind of like taking away from the experience, right? They're much more akin to depressive disorders, low mood, difficulty motivating yourself, difficulty engaging with people, social withdrawal, difficulty thinking and kind of gathering your thoughts and focusing on one thing at once. So for many people, those will be the persisting symptoms, right? Like someone might be diagnosed with schizophrenia. They're struggling with motivation. They're struggling to get through their daily list of tasks. Those will be the things that will be visible. And since we're talking about friendship, I think that those are important factors in building friendships, right? People who struggle mainly with negative symptoms, as Leah is. Again, right? Like, how do I talk to my friends about the fact that I said that I will attend that birthday party and I'm not there because it was too hard for me to get out and get myself ready? How do I talk with my employer about the fact that I wasn't in a place where I could do the things that were expected of me, right? So I also think that there is a lot that is not very movie-like about that diagnosis. That is just not everyone is aware of it.
Leah, how does that, do you have anything to add to that in terms of your experience? I'd never before heard this framing of positive and negative symptoms, but it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that as far as it goes from my experience, like with negative symptoms, like I have really bad memory issues. Like that's one thing that has come up for me with having schizophrenia. And that's been a huge hindrance on like my relationships, because all of a sudden, like I'll be talking to someone like we were just doing now, and I won't remember what they just said or like what they said a day ago, or, you know, and it's like that can really impact how you form your friendships or whether they even continue at all, you know, because some people they just won't put up with that, you know.
Did you find that you want to talk to your friends or prospective friends about your diagnosis?
Yeah, I mean, I was able to talk to, like, my neighbor. Like, I felt like we talked about it a lot, and I felt like she understood. Like, she had, you know, issues of her own, so she did understand. I think it was just, you know, the way my interaction was with her that she was kind of off-putting, maybe, you know? And that was just because I was just too, she just felt like I was just too there all the time, you know? Like, I was messaging her a lot, and I was, you know, just wanting to hang out all the time. And I guess she wasn't into it. I don't know, you know?
I wanted to ask if you felt like you wanted to hang out all the time because you really felt connected to her, or because there just weren't that many other people in your life at that moment?
Yeah, it could be a combination of both. Like, I mean, I felt like she was somebody that I was really connecting with, but at the same time, like, there wasn't really anybody else around, you know? I mean, besides her, like, that was the friend, you know? So.
It's so tricky, right? Because when we want to make connections, when we want to make friends, we sometimes can feel like, well, I should take this person on as a friend because this is the only person that's available to me. You were someone who just wanted more intensity, wanted more of those, as you said, deep conversations, wanted to spend more time together. And she just maybe was someone who didn't want as much with one person.
She actually did tell me, she was like, well, I'm just not, you know, I kind of just hang out with my boyfriend at home, and I'm not interested in really like having these deep relationships, is basically what she told me. And I think it was kind of on my end then that like I didn't really fully understand that, or something kind of got miscommunicated, because then I felt like, I don't know, maybe she would change her mind on that, or she would, you know, you always have that kind of voice in the back of your head saying like, well, but you have a good connection, so maybe there's still something there, you know?
Well, this makes me wonder, Leah has to sort of behave differently in order to have friendships on the one hand, or you have to find the right people who are capable of showing up for the kind of friendship that you want. Like, what is the balance there? Is there stuff that Leah should be doing differently or thinking about as she approaches building friendships? Or is it kind of like you have to kind of find the right people?
So I am a believer in a society in which we can exist with people who have different needs. And we find ways to exist as a community of people who have different needs. Because that is in some ways an enriching experience for all of us, right?
Yeah.
So I would say that in that situation, I would hope, and of course it's difficult, and earlier we were talking about, right, like what would be for Leah a perfect friendship or an ideal friendship if everything went well. So for me, if everything went well, it would be a situation in which Leah can educate others on what's going on for her if she feels like doing it. But people who are there, who are interested in her as a person, who see her interests, who see her passion for, I don't know, arts and crafts or books that she enjoys reading, are also willing to do the work of understanding that those might be challenges in that friendship, right? That maybe sometimes she will forget about birthdays and they won't take it personally, right? In some ways, they will make space for her. And that Leah could be honest about her limits and her needs in those friendships.
While Aleksandra encourages looking for new places to find friends, she also stresses that it's important to be kind to yourself. This is a process that can take time. And if you're like Leah, it can be easy to apply these pressures on yourself to always get things right.
So I think that just what comes to my mind is this idea that we can encourage ourselves to be kind to ourselves, making the first move, offering to help someone, but also not beating ourselves in case they don't reciprocate, they're not interested, they're not available for whatever are their own reasons. Because I think especially when we struggle with negative thoughts or judgment, it's easy to see those moments as a reflection on our ability to form friendships or on us somehow, when they just might be situational factors or something that is not really about us, but rather about the other person and whatever is going on in their life.
Right. Yeah. And that's been like one of the biggest things, like challenges that I've dealt with, honestly, is that just the fear of rejection, you know, it's like, and I think that's what kind of pushed me to keep reaching out even after she had already told me like, hey, I'm not looking for a constant friend. And then I was kind of like, oh no, like here comes the rejection. I better like step up my game or something and like make it so that, you know, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I think a lot of people listening will relate to that feeling of like wanting to avoid rejection by trying harder. And it also feels like there's sort of three parts happening here to finding a community. It's like one of them is like knowing where to look or find actual people, like where are the actual folks at. The second one is a willingness to put yourself out there in terms of these people, like in terms of, like Aleksandra was saying, like, hey, can we hang out? Hey, are you open for coffee? What have you? And then the third part is like knowing how to sort of realistically hold the possibilities of that relationship in a way that isn't asking more from it than is possible. Aleksandra, is that kind of a fair way of thinking about sort of breaking this process down?
Yeah, and I would also say that in that last piece, right, like there's also this added asterisk of maintaining relationships, right? How do you, in a way, respect what you want and what they want, how you're self-aware and understand your diagnosis, and at the same time remember that you're unique, you are who you are, and start navigating the balance of opening yourself up to the other person. Right? Like maybe you do decide to share your diagnosis, but maybe not. Maybe you, for some people that I have worked with, it's easier to talk about symptoms rather than about diagnosis. So instead of saying, I have schizophrenia, saying like, oh, sometimes I have days when it's difficult for me to motivate myself, or sometimes I might not be available because I require medical help on a regular basis, right? Kind of like describing it in a way that the other person can, in a way, relate to and can understand.
Leah, I'm curious what you're thinking hearing all this. I know sometimes I do this thing where someone's telling me you should do this, and I'm like, yeah, totally. But in my mind, I'm like, I'm not fucking doing that. That's crazy. Like I'm wondering the extent, like what kind of barriers or questions or doubts are coming up inside you as you hear all of this like advice, if any.
I think like a lot of times, like I put a big emphasis on like, well, I better have these in-person relationships. I put a huge emphasis on like, well, I have to meet people in person. It can't be online, because if it's online, then somehow I'm like missing the whole, you know, flesh and blood kind of part.
Right.
And so,
like
and so and so I'm like, so I need to, I think, understand that like, you know, I do have a comfort zone, and my comfort zone might just be like online right now. It might not be going and meeting people in person, because I might not just be there yet, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's something really powerful in there about kind of knowing, like on the one hand, pushing yourself, and on the other hand, knowing what your limitations are, or being gentle with yourself. It's like, push but be gentle. That's an interesting kind of paradox. I'm wondering, Aleksandra, how you talk patients through balancing that. When should a person sort of push past their own fears and kind of like seize the day, and when is it important for them to honor what's coming up for them?
Let's say that my resources are depleted. I'm tired. I haven't been sleeping well. I haven't been eating well. Or there's something very stressful happening in my life. Maybe it's the time to retreat a little bit more, take care of myself. Maybe this is not the time to push. But let's say that things actually have been going well. For many people, spring is a time of opening, and mood can be better just by the virtue of getting more light. Maybe that's the time to challenge yourself, or maybe challenge is not the word, to gradually expose yourself, right? But again, knowing when is the time to maybe be a little bit on the back foot, taking care of yourself when things are not going well, where things are feeling shaky, and when you're feeling like your resources are there to challenge yourself a little bit.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like you're talking about just being like paying attention to yourself and the changing aspects of your capacity. And Leah, I'm wondering, well, I guess first what your thoughts are about that. And also I'm kind of wondering where you feel like you are now, like today.
You know, I think at this point right now in my life, I'm more at a point where I'm dealing with a lot of stressful things, and I honestly don't mind just kind of going about my day to day and just doing the things I enjoy, because really that's what's saving me right now, you know? So I'm like, so I think that she's totally right about that. Sometimes you just have to retreat, you know, and you have to just not push yourself if it's not the right moment.
What are some of the things you enjoy right now?
Well, I love to listen to music. Like, that's one thing. I'm like a huge collector of music. So I'm basically just looking for all sorts of different kinds. And so, yeah, I spend a lot of time doing that. Mainly it's just that or like computer stuff.
I love that.
Yeah. I have a tendency to like everything. And when I say that, I mean like I want to be able to do anything that's in front of me, you know, like whether it's like join the theater group or go to a big concert or whatever. But if it's, you know, I have to start realizing that if it's not in my comfort zone, or if it's not something that aligns well with what I can do, then, you know, it's probably not the best option.
For many of us, it's important to realize what our limits are. It can be wonderful to challenge ourselves and to push the boundaries of our social comfort zones, but some days you wake up just feeling low. Whether you struggle with mental illness or not, it is crucial to know what is best for you day to day and to not judge yourself too harshly. Up next, what happens when a friendship changes or just doesn't pan out the way we expected? More with Leah and Aleksandra in a moment.
Eat stress-free this spring with Factor's delicious, ready-to-eat meals. Every fresh, never frozen meal is chef-crafted, dietitian-approved, and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. Choose from a weekly menu of 35 options, including popular options like Calorie Smart or Keto, Protein Plus, or Vegan and Veggie. Also, discover more than 60 add-ons every week, like breakfast, on-the-go lunch, snacks, and beverages to help you stay fueled and feel good all day long. What are you waiting for? Get started today and fuel up for your springtime goals. I just order ahead of time exactly what I need, and there I go. I have my meal ready to go without having to think about all the different choices I often need to make because Factor has made them for me. Head to factormeals.com/how250 and use code how250 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next box. That's code how250 at factormeals.com/how250 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next box while the subscription is active.
This episode is brought to you by Choiceology, an original podcast from Charles Schwab. I'm Dr. Katie Milkman, a behavioral scientist and professor at the Wharton School and the author of the best-selling book, How to Change. You may have heard expressions like, time to get up and going, today's bad decisions aren't going to make themselves, Or bad decisions make good stories. But really, no one wants to suffer the consequences of making a bad choice. Join me as I share true stories from sports heroes, Nobel laureates, and everyday people faced with monumental decisions. We'll discuss the latest research in behavioral science and dive into themes like whether we can learn to make smarter decisions and how powerful it can be to get a do-over. And we'll share useful tools and strategies to help you make better choices in your own life. You can find Choiceology at schwab.com/podcast or wherever you listen.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Whether you're driving, cooking, or doing laundry, Progressive knows the podcasts you listen to go best when they're bundled with another activity, much like how their Progressive home and auto policies go best when they're bundled. Having these two policies together makes taking care of your insurance easier and could help you save too. Customers who save by switching their home and car insurance to Progressive save nearly $800 on average. That's a whole lot of savings and protection for your favorite podcast listening activities, like going on a road trip, cooking dinner, and even hitting the gym. Yep, your home and your car are even easier to protect when you bundle your insurance together. Find your perfect combo. Get a home and car insurance quote at Progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $793 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary.
We're back with Dr. Aleksandra Rayska and our listener, Leah, who is feeling anxious about an old friend of hers that has drifted apart.
I feel like that's something that I could cultivate, but oftentimes I just don't, because I don't know, like she's just more kind of like a girly girl in this certain kind of sense, and I'm not. I'm kind of more of like a tomboyish kind of, I just have more of those kind of interests and values, and I just get so nervous about the fact that we're just so different, but she seems to accept who I am, which I think is really kind of the turning point and all that,
Yeah, and it really sounds like you're wrestling with the thought, like, is she a good match for me for a friend? But maybe she's a good match for me for an acquaintance, for someone that I sometimes spend time with, right? Like, not every person will be someone with whom we will be able to have those more meaningful conversations for a variety of reasons, right?
Right, yeah. Then that's kind of where I feel comfortable right now, is I just feel comfortable with, like, we reach out to each other, on Messenger. We just kind of, like, keep this dialogue going. It's not every day, sometimes we go out for like a slice of pizza or whatever, and we do that like very rarely, but it's like, that's what I'm comfortable with at the moment. And I think that's, like you're saying, it's okay to, just be okay with that.
Yeah. And I can understand how in that situation, she really became very important. You had high hopes for that relationship developing and morphing into something else, and to see that just not where she is difficult. But at the same time, it sounds like she's not in a place where she could give you the type of connection that you want.
Right. Yeah.
It also doesn't mean that it can't happen in the future, right? Like, it doesn't mean that this is what it will be, right? Something shifts for her, something shifts for you. One day you go for a slice of pizza and you find that the conversation is different and feels different, and the connection between the two of you feels different, and that something is shifting. That's also possible. The fact that this is where it's at now doesn't mean that this is where it will be at forever.
Well, I was just thinking that this still kind of leaves us at what I think is our original problem, because it does feel to me that you are missing that deeper relationship and you would like to find a way to be in that deeper relationship. Is that correct?
Yeah, a lot of it is like myself working against myself, like I'm not doing a lot of the steps that are necessary to make that happen. But I think that's where the mental health comes back in, is like, if it's like a big circle that just keeps going around and around, like it really feels that way. But, and I think at some point, like, I have to be the one to kind of break that cycle,
Is that true, Aleksandra, that Leah is like standing in her way in some sense, or is there another way to look at this?
I hear you saying, like, well, I don't go out much. And I hear in some ways how harsh you are with yourself. I have two thoughts. I had one thought about what you mentioned earlier, that you often feel like the relationship should be in person because otherwise it is somehow subpar and it's not as meaningful, right? But I wonder if it also feels like you can have those deeper conversations with some people that you meet online. Many people feel pretty connected to friends that they meet remotely. And for some of those people, those turn into in-person relationships. For others, they don't, and they remain online. And the other thing that I was thinking about is, yes, if you do want to meet people in person, you have to be out somewhere. But I imagine you probably are already in some spaces, right? Like you're going out somewhere, right? Like even if it is to a grocery store or a coffee shop, or you are somewhere in the world, right? And I guess the question then is, are in those spaces people that potentially you could develop a deeper relationship with, right? Is there a barista that you recognize from the coffee shop that you could start a conversation with? And as we were discussing earlier, right? Like the negative symptoms get in the way of doing things just by the virtue of being negative symptoms. But that doesn't mean that you get in your own way.
Right, yeah. That's important to remember, yeah.
I'm just sitting with that. I guess the other question I have is like, what role does patience play in this process, right? Like the feeling on the one hand, like, gee, I really should have these deep friendships and I don't, which means I'm in a state of failure and I'm not doing it, versus the feeling of like, okay, this is something that I would like for my life. Now that intention is out there and now that I'm like clear on that, let this process unfold.
Yeah, I do put a lot of pressure, and I often feel like, I need to be at this other place in life.
And I can also understand that when it's painful to be where you are at, there is that desire to move to the next place, right? And that in itself can put a lot of strain on you and on, right, like potential relationships. But as you said, Carvell, things also take time.
Yeah.
What are you thinking, Leah?
I just agree with all of it. I just, I'm just frustrated. I'm just like frustrated right now because I just can't remember anything. So it's just like, I don't know why. I just have really bad memory issues lately, so.
You're worried that you won't be able to remember what we talked about?
Like when he was talking, like I couldn't remember like the sentence that he literally was just saying. Like, I don't know what's wrong, and I haven't been to a doctor yet, so I don't know like why that's happening.
Can we talk a little bit about what care and treatment for that particular symptom might look like, Aleksandra?
Leah, I obviously don't know what's your treatment plan, and but I would imagine that speaking primarily with your psychiatrist and wondering with them about potential, yes, those might be related to cognitive symptoms of your illness, but maybe there is something that can be changed about your medication regime that could also help with some of those cognitive issues. There are both cognitive remediation classes and groups for people with schizophrenia that can help with specifically cognitive. And when I use the word cognitive, I mean like related to thinking, related to concentration, related to memory, things like that, right? Like there are specific exercises and like games that you do on a computer and all of that stuff that can help with that. And if it really feels like this is something that's impacting your life really now at the moment so much, I think it's really worth having an open conversation with your provider and seeing what can be integrated into your treatment plan so that you can live a fuller life. I wouldn't necessarily also assume that this state is how it will keep on being.
You know, it also strikes me that part of the work here is like, and I think you know this already, Leah, is like finding the people who are okay with whatever it is that you're struggling with at a given moment. Like, it's true that not everyone is going to be capable of showing up for a friendship like that. But it's also true that the fact of having either memory difficulties or any of the other symptoms doesn't necessarily make you not suited for friendship. It does feel like it's about finding the people who are okay with that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Because this happens all the time on this show where someone has a difficulty, a personal difficulty that they didn't choose, they didn't create for themselves, they just have. But somewhere along the line, we internalize the idea that like we're less worthy because we have this quote unquote shortcoming. The more and more I talk to people who have similar issues, the more and more it becomes clear to me that it's not really about whether or not you're worthy of a friendship. You are worthy of a friendship. There are people out there who know how to love. It's just a matter of finding them.
Right.
Thinking about what you just said, I'm also thinking that your experience can expand their experience. You're an addition to their understanding of the world. Like, relationship with you deepens their understanding of the community they exist in and the world they exist in. You're bringing something to their lives and to their world.
How is this landing for you, Leah?
It's all really good information. It's all stuff that like I can relate to. I mean, it's been really, really helpful, you know, and I'm sorry for me getting emotional. I just like,
no, of course.
It's just the fact that, you know, my symptoms are like on display right now, you know, and so that's what I was kind of feeling ashamed about. But I feel like the way you guys have described it and everything, I mean, yeah, it really hits home.
Aleksandra, I also love what you said about, you know, the assets that Leah brings to a relationship. I mean, I'm sure there are so many other things that make you a gift to be around, a pleasure to be close with. And I just want to uplift those things. Sometimes we do get really bogged down in like thinking about what we don't have, and we forget to acknowledge what we do.
Right.
Your own uniqueness is your own uniqueness. Who you are and how you are and the loyalty, that is you. That's not necessarily described by the diagnosis. And that is not to say that there can be such a clear distinction. This is your diagnosis and this is you. But there is a unique way in which you're going through the experience of your diagnosis.
We are all unique individuals with different life details, right? Whether we have a mental health diagnosis or social anxiety or crooked teeth, there are always aspects of our lives that can feel like a hindrance. But at the end of the day, they're only just one part of who we are. They don't define us or our value as a whole.
I think that I would keep in mind, when is the time to retreat? When is the time to push forward? And another thing that I was also thinking is this idea of a match, right? Like, maybe some people are a good match to just hang out from time to time. Some people will be a good match to have a deeper, more meaningful relationship. And both are fine.
You know, what I took away from this is basically just to not be so hard on myself, you know, and I know that sounds really simple, but I mean, it's something I really struggle with. And I really like what you said about the retreat and then, you know, and push yourself, because there's times when I expect myself just to, you know, be on it, be ready for whatever, you know, be willing to do whatever. And I just need to be okay with maybe now's not the time, you know, and that's okay.
Yeah. Leah, I just want to thank you for sharing so much with us, like so much honesty and vulnerability. And I think we all feel really connected to your struggle, and I think our listeners will too. And Aleksandra, thank you so much for your presence and your wisdom and just for sharing everything with us.
Thank you. And thank you, Leah. It takes a lot of guts. That's another asset that you're bringing. You're clearly a brave person who's willing to put herself out there. So Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
If you're struggling with mental health issues, make sure to contact your primary care provider, and if you need help right away, you can always reach the Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988. You know, I can still feel Leah on my heart, and maybe you can too. And maybe this is because we can all relate to the feeling of wanting to be close, wanting to love and be loved, and then having something stand in the way of that. But there's more for me. Like, there's also this thing about knowing that what truly stands in the way for Leah isn't really Leah or even Leah's symptoms. I think that it's people's inability, our inability to love each other just the way we are. Like, it shouldn't be hard for Leah to be in close friendship with someone, even if she forgets birthdays or forgets what you just said, or she doesn't feel like leaving the house for days, or she needs to talk with someone. That shouldn't stand in the way of her having a friendship, but it does. And that's not her fault. I think it's just that there are a lot of people out there who don't yet know the true glory, the true power of loving someone completely. Not only does it make more opportunities for people to be loved, to be held, but loving with very few conditions on that love also makes you feel more alive, safer, more connected to the world. It's kind of a win-win. Aleksandra was right. In any relationship, it's Leah that is the gift. That's just my feeling, anyway. If you enjoyed this conversation and you're ready to talk about the big stuff that you want to do or stuff that you want to deal with, but you're not sure where to start, then maybe you should reach out to us. You can send us a note at howto@slate.com or leave us a voicemail at 646-495-4001, and we might have you on the show. And thanks to Leah for sharing her story with us, and to Dr. Aleksandra Rayska for their useful advice. How To is produced by Rosemary Belson with Kevin Bendis, Joel Meyer is senior editor, and Derek John is executive producer. Merritt Jacob is senior technical director and composed our theme music. Charles Duhigg created the show, Courtney Martin is my co-host, and I'm Carvell Wallace. Thanks for listening.
On Death, Sex, and Money, we feature interviews with you, our community of listeners, getting honest about uncomfortable things.
I developed an illness where it isn't safe for me to drive. A friend once said to me, "Sex is like air. You don't think about it until you're not getting enough." This is a similar sort of thing if you just replace sex with driving.
Listen to Death, Sex, and Money wherever you get podcasts.